The palace windows stood open to the evening air as the last rays of sunlight faded behind the hills of ancient Samaria. Shadows stretched across polished stone floors where servants whispered in fearful voices, careful not to be heard. Outside the towering walls, the city was strangely quiet. The usual sounds of merchants, children, and travelers had disappeared, replaced by an uneasy silence that seemed to warn of something terrible drawing near. Inside one of the highest chambers stood an elderly queen. She had ruled kingdoms, commanded armies, and watched kings rise and fall. Her name alone had inspired loyalty in some hearts and fear in countless others. Even now, as danger approached, she refused to bow her head. With steady hands, she looked into a polished bronze mirror. She carefully painted her eyes with dark kohl, arranged her royal hair beneath an elegant headdress, and dressed herself in garments worthy of a queen. It was a surprising act. Many would have expected panic, tears, or desperate prayers. Instead, she prepared herself as though she were about to welcome honored guests. But these visitors carried swords, not gifts. Below, soldiers gathered at the palace gates. Their commander had already overthrown one king after another. No city had stopped him, no army had turned him back. His name spread across Israel like a storm driven by desert winds. Jehu. As horses thundered into the royal courtyard, the queen stepped toward the window overlooking the city. She did not hide in the shadows. She did not beg for mercy. Looking down at the man who had come to end her reign, she spoke words filled with both pride and defiance. For a brief moment, time itself seemed to stand still. Then loyal servants became traitors. Hands reached for the queen. A scream echoed through the palace, and one of the most unforgettable deaths in ancient history unfolded exactly as a prophecy had declared years before. It was an ending so shocking that it has been remembered for nearly 3,000 years. To some, it proved that no one can escape divine judgment. To others, it marked the violent conclusion of a fierce political struggle where history was written by the victors. But who was Jezebel? Really? Was she nothing more than the wicked queen described in ancient scripture? Or was she a powerful foreign ruler whose intelligence and determination threatened an entire kingdom? To answer those questions, we must travel back many centuries, to a world where kings claimed authority from the gods, where prophets challenged empires, and where religion was inseparable from politics. Long before her tragic end, before the prophecies and accusations, before her name became a symbol of evil, Jezebel was simply a princess born into one of the richest civilizations of the ancient Mediterranean. Our journey begins there. The ancient Near East was a land of remarkable contrasts. Fertile valleys bordered harsh deserts. Snow-covered mountains overlooked warm coastal waters. Great rivers carried life through lands where rainfall could disappear for months. Across this landscape, powerful kingdoms competed for wealth, influence, and survival. Among these civilizations stood the flourishing cities of Phoenicia, stretched along the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Their harbors were crowded with elegant wooden ships whose purple sails carried merchants farther than almost anyone else in the ancient world. They traded cedar timber from Lebanon, delicate glassware, finely crafted jewelry, colorful textiles dyed with rare purple pigments, and countless luxury goods desired by kings from Egypt to Mesopotamia. Unlike many neighboring kingdoms, Phoenicia did not seek greatness through conquest alone. Its true strength lay upon the sea. Phoenician sailors ventured across vast waters, establishing colonies and trade routes that connected distant cultures. Their ships reached Cyprus, North Africa, Sicily, Spain, and perhaps even farther. Every successful voyage brought new wealth, new ideas, and greater influence. Their cities sparkled with prosperity. Markets overflowed with spices, precious metals, carved ivory, fragrant oils, and exotic animals from distant lands. Massive temples honored powerful gods whose blessings were believed to protect both merchants and kings. Skilled craftsmen created works admired across the ancient world, while scribes carefully recorded trade agreements using one of history's earliest alphabets, a writing system that would eventually influence many modern languages. This was not an isolated kingdom hidden from history. It was one of the world's great centers of commerce and culture. And within this remarkable civilization ruled King Ahab. Ancient historians describe him as both a king and a high priest. Before taking the throne, he served the powerful god Baal, combining religious authority with political ambition. His rise to power was dramatic, achieved through violence and determination, reflecting an age when royal succession was rarely peaceful. His daughter would inherit more than royal blood. She would grow up surrounded by diplomacy, ceremony, and the belief that rulers governed with divine approval. Her name was Jezebel. Although much about her childhood remains unknown, historians can imagine the world that shaped her. As a princess, she would have walked through magnificent palace halls decorated with imported stone, polished wood, and colorful fabrics. She likely learned several languages spoken by traders arriving daily from distant kingdoms. She would have watched diplomats negotiate alliances while priests performed elaborate ceremonies and towering temples that filled the air with incense and sacred music. Education for royal children extended far beyond reading and writing. Princesses were expected to understand politics, diplomacy, religion, and the delicate balance of international relationships. Every conversation at court carried meaning. Every marriage proposal could determine the future of nations. Jezebel grew up watching power at work. She learned that kingdoms survived through alliances rather than sentiment. Strength earned respect. Weakness invited invasion. These lessons would remain with her for the rest of her life. Religion also shaped every part of Phoenician society. The people honored Baal, whom they believed controlled storms, rain, and agricultural fertility. In lands where harvests depended upon seasonal rainfall, Baal represented life itself. Alongside him stood the goddess Asherah, associated with motherhood, fertility, and protection. Their temples were not simply places of worship, they were centers of government, economics, and culture. Priests advised kings, festivals united communities, religious ceremonies reinforced political authority. To a Phoenician princess, these beliefs were not strange or controversial, they formed the natural order of the world. Far to the south, however, another kingdom worshipped very differently. Israel had grown into a prosperous monarchy under successive rulers. Yet beneath its growing wealth lay increasing political uncertainty. Neighboring kingdoms threatened its borders, while internal divisions weakened national unity. Its king, Ahab, faced a difficult challenge. Military strength alone could not guarantee stability. Strategic alliances were essential. One solution appeared across the Mediterranean coast. A marriage between King Ahab of Israel and Princess Jezebel of Phoenicia promised enormous advantages. It would strengthen trade, improve diplomatic relations, and unite two influential kingdoms against common rivals. For ancient rulers, marriage was rarely about love. It was about survival. When the agreement was made, Jezebel likely left behind everything familiar: her family, her homeland, her temples, and the sea that had defined Phoenician life for generations. Ahead lay Israel, a kingdom with different traditions, different customs, different beliefs, different prophets. She arrived not simply as a bride, but as a foreign queen carrying the culture of one civilization into the heart of another. At first, the alliance may have appeared successful. Trade flourished, wealth increased, political ties strengthened. Yet beneath this promising beginning, invisible tensions quietly grew. The God of Israel demanded exclusive worship. The gods of Phoenicia welcomed many forms of devotion. Neither worldview could easily accept the other. What began as diplomacy would soon become one of history's most explosive religious and political conflicts. The young queen who had crossed the sea believing she was securing peace would instead become one of the most controversial women the ancient world has ever known. And before long, an unknown prophet from the rugged hills of Israel would step forward with a message that would forever change the course of her life. His name was Elijah, and his first words to the queen's kingdom would shake the nation to its very foundations. The arrival of Queen Jezebel in Israel did not feel like the beginning of a tragedy. To many, it looked like the dawn of a new era. Caravans loaded with cedar wood from Lebanon crossed the borders. Merchant ships filled the ports with luxury goods from distant lands. Markets became busier, royal treasuries grew richer, and foreign ambassadors visited Samaria more frequently than ever before. King Ahab had achieved what many rulers dreamed of. He had secured one of the strongest political alliances in the ancient Near East. For ordinary people, life seemed to improve. Trade brought opportunity. Farmers found new buyers for their crops. Skilled craftsmen gained access to expensive materials that had once been impossible to obtain. The kingdom appeared stronger than it had been in generations, yet prosperity often hides tensions that cannot be seen at first. Behind the walls of the royal palace, two civilizations were learning that sharing power was far more difficult than signing a marriage agreement. Jezebel had not abandoned her homeland when she crossed the sea. She carried Phoenicia with her, its traditions, its customs, its language, and above all, its gods. To the people of Phoenicia, religion was woven into every part of daily life. Baal was believed to command the storms that watered the fields. Without rain, crops withered. Without crops, kingdoms starved. Honoring Baal was not simply a matter of personal faith, it was seen as essential for the survival of society. Jezebel had grown up believing this without question. Now she lived in a kingdom where another belief stood above all others. The God of Israel demanded complete devotion. There could be no rivals, no shared temples, no divided loyalties. These two worlds could not comfortably exist side by side. At first, the differences may have seemed manageable. Royal marriages often introduced foreign customs into neighboring kingdoms. Ancient courts were places where different languages, clothing, and traditions mixed together, but religion carried far greater weight than fashion or diplomacy. Soon, Jezebel began encouraging the worship she had always known. Altars dedicated to Baal appeared in Israel. Temples were constructed with royal support. Priests from Phoenicia were welcomed into the kingdom, where they conducted ceremonies that would have seemed familiar to the queen but deeply unsettling to many Israelites. One of the largest temples rose in Samaria itself, the royal capital. Its towering columns reflected the wealth of the kingdom. Fragrant incense drifted through its halls. Musicians filled the air with sacred songs while richly dressed priests performed rituals that had been practiced along the Mediterranean coast for centuries. To Jezebel, this may have represented progress. To many in Israel, it felt like betrayal. The conflict was no longer political. It had become spiritual. The kingdom slowly divided into opposing camps. Some welcomed the new prosperity and accepted the foreign influences that accompanied it. Others believed their nation was abandoning the covenant that had defined Israel for generations. Families disagreed. Communities argued. Religious leaders warned that disaster would follow. The deeper the divide became, the more determined Jezebel appeared. Ancient biblical writers describe her not as a passive queen but as an active political force. Unlike many royal wives who remained in the background, Jezebel exercised remarkable influence within the palace. She advised the king, directed royal policy, and confidently used her authority. Whether every accusation recorded against her was entirely fair remains a matter of debate among historians, but few scholars doubt one thing: she was powerful, exceptionally powerful. King Ahab himself was no weak ruler. Historical records outside the Bible suggest that he commanded one of the strongest armies in the region. The famous Kirk monolith of the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III even lists Ahab among the coalition of rulers who opposed Assyria at the Battle of Karkar around 853 BC. According to that inscription, Ahab contributed an impressive force of chariots, showing that Israel had become a significant military power. This paints a fascinating picture. While biblical writers focused primarily on religious conflict, archaeology reveals a kingdom that was economically successful and militarily respected. It reminds us that history often contains more than one perspective. Yet inside Israel, another battle was quietly unfolding, not one fought with swords, but with faith. According to the biblical account, Jezebel began suppressing the prophets of the Lord. Some were forced into hiding. Others were reportedly killed. One faithful official named Obadiah secretly sheltered 100 prophets inside caves, providing them with food and water while avoiding the queen's attention. Imagine those hidden caves, dark, cold, silent, men whispering prayers while listening for footsteps outside. Every sound might have been the soldiers searching for them. Every sunrise might have been their last. Meanwhile, above ground, the queen's influence continued to expand. She surrounded herself with hundreds of prophets devoted to Baal and Asherah. Royal banquets became gatherings where these religious leaders dined at the queen's own table. To her supporters, this demonstrated strength and stability. To her opponents, it symbolized everything they feared. As months became years, the kingdom moved further toward confrontation. Then something happened that no army could stop. The skies changed. Clouds disappeared. The wind carried dust instead of moisture. The rivers grew shallower. Fields began to crack beneath the relentless heat. At first, people expected the rains to return as they always had. But they did not. Week after week, the earth hardened beneath the blazing sun. Farmers looked upward in desperation. Animals wandered farther in search of water. Harvests failed. Wells dried. The fertile hills of Israel slowly transformed into a thirsty landscape where survival itself became uncertain. According to the Book of Kings, this terrible drought had been announced by a prophet whose name was still unfamiliar to most people, Elijah. Without warning, Elijah had appeared before King Ahab and declared that no rain would fall except by the command of the Lord. Then he vanished. The drought lasted not weeks, not months, but years. Whether understood as divine judgment, natural climate variation, or a combination of historical memory and theological interpretation, the famine left an unforgettable mark on Israel's traditions. For ancient people, rain meant life, its absence meant death. Ironically, the drought struck at the very heart of Baal's reputation. Baal was believed to command storms and rainfall, yet the skies remained empty. This question echoed through villages, temples, and palace halls alike. If Baal ruled the storms, why had the rain stopped? The silence of the heavens became louder than any argument. Confidence slowly gave way to uncertainty. Even those who had once trusted without hesitation began asking dangerous questions. Jezebel, however, did not retreat. She remained determined. Perhaps she believed the drought would eventually end. Perhaps she viewed Elijah as a political threat rather than a genuine prophet. Or perhaps admitting defeat would have shattered the authority upon which her kingdom depended. Whatever her reasoning, neither side was willing to surrender. The conflict continued to grow. One defended ancient tradition. The other defended exclusive faith. Neither imagined how close they stood to one of the most dramatic confrontations ever recorded in biblical history. Soon, on the rocky slopes of Mount Carmel, hundreds of prophets would gather before thousands of spectators. Fire, silence, prayer, and a challenge that would determine, in the minds of the people, which God truly answered. For Queen Jezebel, it would mark the beginning of a chain of events that could never again be stopped. Her greatest struggle was no longer against neighboring kingdoms. It was against a prophecy that had already begun to unfold. The drought had lasted so long that many children had never known what it felt like to watch rain fall from the sky. The hills of Israel, once covered with green fields and grazing animals, had turned brown beneath the relentless sun. Streams became narrow ribbons of muddy water. Wells that had supplied villages for generations lay almost empty. Dust drifted across roads where merchants once traveled with confidence. Everywhere people asked the same question: when will this end? But one man already knew the answer. Hidden from the king for years, Elijah finally emerged from the wilderness. He did not return with an army. He carried no weapon. His only authority was the conviction that he spoke for the God of Israel. When King Ahab learned that Elijah had appeared, he rode out to meet him. According to the biblical account, the meeting was filled with bitterness. "Is that you, troubler of Israel?" Ahab asked. But Elijah answered with fearless calm, "I have not troubled Israel. You and your father's house have, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord." It was more than an argument between a king and a prophet. It was a collision between two completely different visions of truth. Elijah then issued an extraordinary challenge. "Gather everyone, bring the prophets of Baal, bring the prophets of Asherah, let the people witness who truly rules the heavens." Soon, thousands of Israelites climbed the rocky slopes of Mount Carmel. They came from villages, farms, and towns, curious to witness an event unlike anything they had ever seen. The mountain overlooked the Mediterranean Sea. Dry wind swept across its rugged landscape. The sky above remained painfully clear, offering no sign of the rain that the people desperately needed. Standing before the crowd, Elijah asked a question that echoed across the mountain: "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him." No one answered. Silence settled over the gathering. 2 altars were prepared. 2 sacrifices were placed upon them. Neither would be set on fire by human hands. Instead, the true God would answer with fire from heaven. The prophets of Baal began first. Hour after hour they prayed, they shouted, they danced around the altar. They pleaded for Baal to respond. Morning passed into afternoon. The sun climbed higher, making the heat almost unbearable. Still nothing happened. The altar remained cold. The wood did not burn. The sky remained silent. Then Elijah stepped forward. He repaired an old altar dedicated to the Lord using 12 stones, representing the tribes of Israel. To make the miracle impossible to explain away, he ordered water to be poured over the sacrifice again and again until the trench around the altar overflowed. Everything was soaked. No fire could naturally spread through drenched wood. Then Elijah prayed. His prayer was not long. It was not dramatic. It was simple. He asked only that God reveal himself so the people would know the truth. According to the biblical account, fire immediately fell from heaven. It consumed the sacrifice. It burned the wood. It even scorched the stones and dried the water that filled the trench. The crowd fell to the ground. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. The years of uncertainty suddenly gave way to overwhelming conviction. For Elijah, this was the moment that proved God's power. For Jezebel, it marked a devastating political and religious defeat. The prophets of Baal were seized and executed. When news reached the queen, grief quickly became rage. This was no longer a dispute over worship. It had become deeply personal. Jezebel sent a message to Elijah. So may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. It was a death sentence. The fearless prophet who had confronted kings fled into the wilderness. The Bible portrays Elijah as exhausted and overwhelmed, a reminder that even the strongest faith can experience moments of fear. Yet before disappearing from the story, Elijah received another message, one that would shape Jezebel's future forever. It was not spoken to her directly, but it concerned her more than anyone realized. Years passed. The drought ended. Rain finally returned to Israel. The land slowly recovered. Harvests grew again. At first glance, peace seemed possible, but beneath the surface, something darker was growing inside the royal court. The next chapter of Jezebel's life would become one of the most controversial stories in the Hebrew Bible. It began with a vineyard. Near King Ahab's palace in Jezreel lived a man named Naboth. His vineyard stood beside the royal residence, producing grapes on fertile land that had belonged to his family for generations. To modern readers, it may seem like an ordinary piece of property, but in ancient Israel, ancestral land carried deep meaning. It represented family identity, inheritance, and God's covenant with the people. One day Ahab approached Naboth with what appeared to be a reasonable offer. He wished to purchase the vineyard or exchange it for better land elsewhere. Naboth respectfully refused. "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers." The king returned to the palace deeply disappointed. Ancient scripture describes him lying on his bed, refusing to eat, turning his face toward the wall like a frustrated child denied something he desired. Then Jezebel entered the room. Seeing her husband discouraged, she asked what troubled him. When Ahab explained Naboth's refusal, Jezebel seemed astonished. From her Phoenician upbringing, the situation likely made little sense. Kings possessed enormous authority. Why should a private citizen deny the wishes of the ruler? Her response reflected the political traditions of her homeland. "Do you now govern Israel?" she asked. Then she told him not to worry, she would obtain the vineyard. What happened next has echoed through history for nearly 3,000 years. According to the biblical account, Jezebel wrote letters using the king's seal. She instructed local leaders to proclaim a public fast and seat Naboth in a place of honor before arranging for false witnesses to accuse him of blasphemy and treason. The accusations carried the death penalty. Naboth was taken outside the city and stoned. Only after his death did Ahab take possession of the vineyard. Whether every detail occurred exactly as recorded remains debated among historians. But within the biblical narrative the story became a powerful warning against the abuse of royal authority. The vineyard was won, but its price would be far greater than anyone inside the palace imagined. As Ahab walked through the newly acquired land, perhaps believing the matter settled, another figure appeared. Elijah. The prophet stood waiting among the vines. His words were calm, but they carried terrifying weight. He declared that because of the murder of Naboth and the injustice committed in that place, disaster would come upon the royal house. Ahab's dynasty would fall, his descendants would perish, and then Elijah spoke words that would become one of the most chilling prophecies in the Bible. As for Jezebel, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. "The dog shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel." The sentence hung in the air. It was horrifying, unthinkable. A queen who had once crossed the Mediterranean as a proud princess was now the subject of a prophecy so terrible that generations would remember it. At that moment, nothing happened. The palace still stood. The army remained loyal. Jezebel retained her power. Life continued. Yet from this point forward, an invisible shadow followed every step she took. The prophecy waited, patient, silent, unfulfilled. But history has a way of moving toward moments that seem impossible to escape. Far beyond the palace walls, a military commander named Jehu was rising through the ranks of Israel's army. Soon, the kingdom would be shaken by rebellion, and the final chapter of Queen Jezebel's life would begin. Years passed. The prophecy spoken in Naboth's vineyard seemed to fade into the background of everyday life. Seasons came and went. Harvests returned after the long drought. Children grew into adults. New political alliances formed, and old enemies disappeared from history. To many, Elijah's warning may have sounded like little more than the words of a determined prophet, but history has a quiet way of keeping its promises. While Queen Jezebel continued to wield influence within the royal court, the kingdom around her was slowly changing. King Ahab eventually marched to war against Aram. Despite being warned by the prophet Micaiah that disaster awaited him, Ahab entered the battle disguised as an ordinary soldier, hoping to escape the fate foretold against him. For a time, his plan appeared to work. The battle raged across the dusty plains as arrows filled the sky. Then, according to the biblical account, a single arrow shot seemingly at random struck Ahab between the joints of his armor. Wounded and bleeding, he remained standing in his chariot until sunset. By evening, the king was dead. His blood flowed onto the floor of the chariot. Later, when the chariot was washed near the pool of Samaria, the Bible records that dogs licked his blood, fulfilling part of Elijah's prophecy. Yet one part remained unfinished. Jezebel still lived. Her influence did not disappear with Ahab's death. She remained a respected figure within the royal family, serving as queen mother during the reigns of her sons. Although years had passed since Elijah first confronted her, she had survived political upheaval, military conflicts, and the death of her husband. Perhaps she believed the danger had finally passed. Perhaps she thought the prophecy belonged to another time. But beyond the palace walls, another story was unfolding. Far from Samaria, the prophet Elisha, Elijah's successor, called one of his followers and gave him an unusual mission. The young prophet carried a flask of oil. His destination was a military camp. There he sought out a commander named Jehu. Jehu was an experienced soldier. He had fought in Israel's wars and earned the respect of the army. Nothing in his life suggested that he was about to become king. The prophet entered quietly. He asked to speak with Jehu alone. Inside a private room, he poured oil over the commander's head and delivered a startling message. The Lord had chosen Jehu to become king of Israel, but this new crown came with a terrible responsibility. He was commanded to destroy the entire house of Ahab. The murders, the idolatry, the persecution of the prophets, the bloodshed. According to the biblical narrative, all of it demanded judgment. Before anyone could question him, the prophet fled. Jehu stepped outside. His fellow officers immediately noticed something had happened. At first, he tried to dismiss their questions, but soldiers rarely overlook unusual events. Finally, he revealed everything. Without hesitation, the officers spread their cloaks beneath his feet like a royal carpet. Trumpets echoed through the camp. Jehu is king. The rebellion had begun. Word traveled quickly. Messengers rode across the kingdom carrying urgent news. Cities opened their gates. Military leaders changed their allegiance. The royal family suddenly found itself surrounded by uncertainty. Jehu wasted no time. His chariot raced across the countryside toward Jezreel. Ancient writers describe his driving as wild and relentless. Even the watchman standing atop the city's tower recognized the furious speed of the approaching horses. "The driving is like that of Jehu," he reported. "He drives furiously." King Joram rode out to meet him. The two men met near the very vineyard that had once belonged to Naboth. It was the same land where Elijah had pronounced judgment years before. The location was no coincidence. Joram called out, "Have you come in peace, Jehu?" The answer was immediate. How can there be peace as long as the idolatry and witchcraft of your mother Jezebel continue? Before Joram could escape, Jehu drew his bow. The arrow flew through the air. It struck the king in the back, piercing his heart. His body collapsed inside the chariot. Jehu ordered that it be thrown into Naboth's vineyard. The prophecy was advancing one step at a time. Now only one figure remained. Inside the palace, Queen Jezebel received the news. She understood immediately. The rebellion had reached her door. Everything she had built over decades was collapsing within hours. Many rulers in her position might have fled. Others might have begged for mercy. Jezebel chose neither. Instead, she did something that has fascinated historians for centuries. She prepared herself. The Bible says she carefully painted her eyes with dark kohl. She arranged her hair. She dressed in royal clothing. Why? No ancient source tells us with certainty. Some scholars believe she wished to die with dignity, appearing every bit the queen she had always been. Others suggest it was an act of defiance, a final refusal to appear frightened before her enemy. Still others think she hoped to influence Jehu through diplomacy or royal presence. Whatever her reason, the image has become unforgettable. An aging queen, standing tall, dressed in splendor, facing the end without hiding. As Jehu entered the city, Jezebel appeared at an upper palace window. Looking down upon him, she called out with biting sarcasm, "Have you come in peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?" It was a carefully chosen insult. Centuries earlier, another man named Zimri had assassinated a king and briefly seized Israel's throne before dying only days later. Jezebel was reminding Jehu that usurpers rarely survived. It was one final attempt to undermine him. Jehu did not answer her. Instead, he looked upward. "Who is on my side?" "Who?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then several palace officials stepped forward. They looked down from the window. These were the very servants who had once obeyed Jezebel's commands without question. Now they faced a choice: remain loyal to a doomed queen, or save themselves by supporting the new king. Jehu gave only one command: throw her down. History seemed to pause. Then the servants obeyed. Jezebel was pushed from the window. She fell from the palace heights. Her body struck the stone pavement below. The impact was devastating. The horses charged forward. According to the biblical account, Jehu's chariot passed over her body as he entered the palace. Yet the story was not over. After eating and drinking, Jehu remembered the queen. Perhaps despite everything, he believed that a king's daughter deserved a proper burial. He ordered his servants to bury her, but when they returned, they found almost nothing. Only her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands remained. The rest, according to the biblical narrative, had been consumed by stray dogs wandering outside the city walls. The horrifying prophecy spoken years earlier had been fulfilled. The queen who had once walked through the magnificent palaces of Phoenicia, who had ruled beside one of Israel's most powerful kings, who had commanded priests, advisors, and armies, had disappeared into history with no royal tomb, no grand monument, no magnificent funeral, only a warning remembered through generations. Jehu recognized the significance immediately. He recalled Elijah's words spoken so many years before. The prophecy was complete. With Jezebel's death, the house of Ahab rapidly collapsed. Jehu continued his campaign, eliminating the remaining royal heirs and many supporters of Baal worship. The political landscape of Israel changed almost overnight. A new dynasty took power, and the religious direction of the kingdom shifted once again. But history is rarely as simple as victory and defeat. For the biblical writers, Jezebel became the ultimate symbol of idolatry, pride, and rebellion against God. Her death demonstrated that divine judgment could not be avoided, no matter how powerful a ruler might become. Yet modern historians often view the events through a broader lens. They point out that ancient royal successions were frequently violent. Entire dynasties were erased to secure a new king's throne. Religious conflict and political ambition were deeply intertwined, making it difficult to separate faith from power. Was Jezebel punished solely because she opposed the God of Israel, or was she also the victim of a ruthless political revolution in which religion and kingship became inseparable? The ancient sources leave us with certainty about the event, but not always about every motive. Even after nearly 3,000 years, the Queen's final moments continue to inspire debate. And perhaps the greatest mysteries surrounding Jezebel are not found in the palace where she died, but beneath the soil of the ancient cities where she once ruled. What has archaeology uncovered? Which legends grew around her name? And could modern discoveries reveal a more complex woman than history has long remembered? Those questions await us in the final chapter of her remarkable story. The echoes of Queen Jezebel's death did not fade with the setting sun over Jezreel. Instead, they grew louder with every passing century. Her story traveled from generation to generation, carried by priests, historians, travelers, and storytellers. Kingdoms disappeared, empires rose and fell, new religions spread across continents, yet the name Jezebel endured. Few figures from the ancient world have left behind a legacy so powerful and so controversial. Even today, nearly 3,000 years later, her name continues to spark debate among historians, archaeologists, theologians, and ordinary readers alike. Was she truly the ruthless queen portrayed in the biblical narrative, or has history remembered only one side of her story? To explore those questions, we must look beyond the dramatic events of her life and examine the clues left behind in history, archaeology, and legend. One of the most fascinating facts about Jezebel is that no contemporary portrait of her has ever been found. We do not know the color of her eyes. We do not know the exact style of her clothing. We cannot say with certainty how tall she was or what her voice sounded like. Everything we imagine about her appearance comes from written descriptions, the fashions of 9th century BC Phoenicia, and archaeological discoveries from the broader region. Yet even without a portrait, we know she belonged to one of the most sophisticated cultures of the ancient Mediterranean. Phoenician artisans were famous for their extraordinary craftsmanship. They created delicate ivory carvings, intricate jewelry of gold and silver, colorful glass vessels, and luxurious fabrics dyed with the famous Tyrian purple, a color so expensive that only royalty could afford it. It is easy to imagine the young princess wearing garments woven with brilliant threads, adorned with precious ornaments brought from distant lands by Phoenician merchant ships. Her world was one of refinement, diplomacy, and wealth. This background may explain why she appeared so confident after arriving in Israel. She was not entering an unfamiliar world as a frightened bride. She came as the daughter of a powerful king, raised to believe that rulers shaped history. One intriguing archaeological discovery has often been linked to Jezebel, though the connection remains uncertain. In 1964, archaeologist Naboth published a beautifully carved seal made of blue stone. The inscription appears to contain the letters of the name Jezebel, accompanied by royal Egyptian-style symbols associated with authority. Some scholars have suggested that the seal may once have belonged to the famous queen herself. Others argue that the inscription is incomplete or that it belonged to another woman with a similar name. The debate continues. If the seal truly belonged to Jezebel, it would represent one of the very few objects directly connected to one of the Bible's most famous women. If not, it remains an extraordinary reminder of the artistic sophistication of the age in which she lived. Archaeology has revealed much about the world that surrounded Jezebel, even if it cannot always identify her personal possessions. Excavations at ancient Samaria have uncovered magnificent ivory carvings that once decorated royal buildings. These elegant pieces depict flowers, animals, and mythological creatures carved with remarkable precision. Some researchers believe these luxurious decorations reflect the wealth of King Ahab's palace described in the Bible as the Ivory House. Although we cannot prove that Jezebel walked through those halls, it is entirely possible that she lived among such splendor. The stones remain silent, yet they allow us to glimpse the world she once knew. Excavations at Jezreel, the city where she met her end, have also uncovered the remains of a fortified royal complex dating to the Iron Age. Massive walls, defensive structures, and evidence of an important administrative center support the biblical picture of Jezreel as a significant royal residence. While archaeologists cannot point to the exact palace window from which Jezebel fell, the discoveries confirm that this was indeed a place worthy of kings and queens. History and archaeology occasionally walk side by side. At other times, they leave unanswered questions. Another fascinating mystery concerns Jezebel's influence over religion. The biblical writers portray her as aggressively promoting the worship of Baal and Asherah throughout Israel. Modern historians generally agree that Phoenician religious practices likely entered Israel through her marriage to Ahab. However, many scholars also note that ancient Israel itself was religiously diverse during this period. Archaeological discoveries suggest that not all Israelites worshipped in exactly the same way. Some inscriptions found at sites such as Kuntilat Adrud and Khirbet el-Kham have led researchers to debate whether certain communities associated the worship of Yahweh with the figure of Asherah. These findings remain controversial, but they reveal that the religious landscape of the ancient Near East was far more complex than simple categories often suggest. The struggle between exclusive worship of one god and older regional traditions may have unfolded gradually over generations. Jezebel happened to stand at the center of that conflict. Legends surrounding her life grew larger with time. In Jewish tradition, she became a warning against idolatry, manipulation, and pride. In Christian writings, her name later appeared symbolically in the Book of Revelation, where Jezebel represents false teaching and spiritual corruption rather than the historical queen herself. Over centuries, her name entered literature, art, and popular culture as a symbol of dangerous influence, yet symbols often become larger than the people from whom they originate. Some modern scholars encourage readers to distinguish between the historical woman and the literary image created around her. They point out that nearly all surviving written sources describing Jezebel were composed by authors deeply opposed to her religious and political agenda. Like many figures from the ancient world, her story survives largely through the writings of her enemies. That does not necessarily make those accounts false, but it reminds us that every historical source carries a perspective. Perhaps the greatest unknown mystery is one we can never fully answer. What did Jezebel believe during her final moments? Standing at that palace window, dressed in royal robes and looking down at Jehu's approaching army, what thoughts filled her mind? Did she remember the temples of Phoenicia where she had spent her childhood? Did she think of her father, King Ahab? Did she regret the choices that had shaped her reign? Or did she remain convinced that history would eventually judge her differently? No ancient text records her private thoughts. Silence keeps those answers hidden. Another enduring mystery concerns her remarkable composure. Why did she apply makeup before facing death? Ancient cosmetics were often associated not only with beauty but also with status and dignity. Many historians believe her actions reflected the behavior expected of royalty. Rather than appearing defeated, she chose to meet death as a queen. Whether interpreted as courage, pride, or defiance, the image has fascinated generations. It reminds us that even in defeat, people often cling to the identity that has defined their lives. As we step back from the dramatic details of Jezebel's story, a broader picture begins to emerge. She lived during one of the most turbulent periods in the history of ancient Israel. Politics and religion were inseparable. Every alliance carried spiritual consequences. Every temple represented political influence. Every prophet challenged not only beliefs but also royal authority. In such a world, compromise was extraordinarily difficult. History remembers Jezebel through the lens of judgment. Archaeology remembers her through fragments of stone, carved ivory, ruined walls, and debated inscriptions. Modern scholarship remembers her as a figure whose life cannot be understood without considering the cultural world from which she came. These perspectives do not erase one another. Instead, they invite us to look more carefully. The past is rarely simple. Heroes may possess flaws, villains may possess virtues, and the truth often lies hidden between certainty and mystery. As the sun sets once more over the ancient ruins of Samaria and Jezreel, only scattered stones remain where kings once issued commands and queens shaped the destiny of nations. The palaces have vanished, the temples have crumbled, the armies have long since disappeared into dust. Only their stories remain. Perhaps that is history's greatest lesson. Power can command armies, build cities, and silence opponents for a time, but no throne lasts forever. No empire escapes the passage of time. Every ruler, whether celebrated or condemned, eventually becomes a memory preserved in fragile words and broken stones. Jezebel sought to leave her mark upon history. She succeeded, but not in the way she imagined. Her life continues to challenge us with timeless questions about power, conviction, faith, justice, and the price of ambition. Whether viewed as a wicked queen, a determined ruler, or a misunderstood political figure, She reminds us that every decision echoes far beyond a single lifetime, and perhaps the most haunting truth of all is this: long after crowns have turned to dust, and mighty kingdoms have disappeared beneath the sands of time, it is not our power that history remembers most, it is the legacy our choices leave behind.